that are happening. So welcome. We are going to officially get started. My name is Michelle. I am joining from Amiskwaci, Waskahigan, Edmonton, Treaty 6 territory. We realize some of you all are joining all across, the northern part of Turtle Island. So we welcome you. We're honored that you're here. I always think it's important to take a moment to press pause in our day. I know we live busy lives. We're holding down our home fires. We're pressing into, the work and the gifts that we have to bring to make our nations and our organizations and our communities just a better, stronger place. So we're busy. There's lots to be done and the lots that we are doing and contributing. But I think it's really important throughout our day to make that space, to make that connection, to press pause, and just to acknowledge the gifts of goodness that is all around us. And it starts with Creator. So we give thanks for the gift of this beautiful day. Wherever you are, I hope, that there's sunshine, metaphorically, perhaps literally, that's going on in your life. But we give thanks for the gift of this day as that sun rises in the east. Creator, walks with us. We never walk alone. So we give thanks of the good gifts that are all around us. So I say, hi, Creator. All right. These are our friends who are joining us from BC. I'm so delighted that they are here. I always walk away, always walk away with great, good knowledge. In fact, whenever I am presenting myself or talking, I will sometimes quote them. I will always bring some of the knowledge that they have shared with me and with us, to other places where I go. So I hope that you come with an open mind, an open heart, and you walk away inspired and motivated, and perhaps seeing a clear picture for yourself, a clear understanding. So today's conversation is how to develop business opportunities for remote communities. So today's workshop will review remote community facts, discuss what is working well to develop First Nation remote community economies, what can be done better to develop First Nation remote community economies, and community economic development planning and institution building best practices. It's the hot weather, it's the heat that's getting to me. So again, these webinars are all about building capacity. It's all about sharing and listening to knowledge, and then applying that knowledge to the areas in which we work. So it's a really good webinar today. A little bit about our friends, and I know that they have so much goodness, so much wealth and knowledge to bring to the table today. But I just want to quickly say, so our guests are Laara and Mark. Again, they're joining us from BC. So really, Laara had started Yaghujaanas, I think, as a friend. I think we've been, in each other's lives virtually for a while. I think I got your last name right. She operates Carden Consulting, which she established in 1997. She holds a master's degree from Royal Roads University, was awarded the Royal Roads University Founders Award, has completed the Justice Institute Conflict Resolution and Negotiation course. She's a member of the Council of Native Development Officers, a member of the New Relationship Trust Economic Development Support Team, and is an advisor for the Indigenous Business Awards. She is currently, I think this is new news that I'm reading here, initiating her PhD in Indigenous Governance. Oh, how exciting. And then Mark joined Carden Consulting in the summer of 2017 as a business and life partner. So he has worked with First Nations for more than 10 years, including management services and developing intergovernmental partnerships. Mark has also completed the Justice Institute Conflict Resolution and Mediation Program, has been recognized by the Capital Region District and Lieutenant Governor General for Environmental Leadership. and is currently completing his AIP3 certification with the International Association of Public Participation Practitioners. Holy, we got some wealth, some rich knowledge that's going to be brought to us today. We welcome you so much. Thank you for being here. And I am passing this virtual mic off to you.
Thank you so much. And always lovely to see you, Michelle. And thank you so much for the kind introductions. So thank you everyone for being here today. We're really excited to talk with you about this. Just a little bit of quick check-in. Just wanted to see if when you can, please give your names in the chat room and where you're coming to us from. City, nation, community, wherever you're from, just so we can see where we're speaking to you from or where we're speaking to you at. And also just wondering if possible, if you can turn on your cameras. We'd love to see your beautiful faces so we can see when we're describing something and we see the sideways head puppy dog stare, we kind of go, okay, we've got to explain that a bit more. So it really helps to see your faces if we can. Totally understand if you're having any kind of Wi-Fi issues and you need to keep it off. So thank you so much for joining us today. I should do my protocol introduction. Hadla is akens is akte gudne lagan. Yaghujaanas, Haida Nation. My name is Kun Gaadaas, Yaghujaanas clan of the Haida Nation. Thank you, good people, and I'll let Mark introduce himself.
Osiam, Haishka, Osiam Nishkwelakwa. Greetings in Lakwangan from the community of the Songhees and Kosamson peoples in the lower Vancouver Island around Victoria area. I'm Mark Salter, born and raised here, and very happy to be here and reconnect with Michelle and the team at CANDO. And looking to meet with everybody across this Turtle Island, and it really helps us to know where it is you're coming from. So I'm seeing that Devon's telling this is Waterman First Lake in Saskatchewan. That's really helpful, so we know exactly where you are. If anybody else can share that information, it'd be great. Since we're going to be talking about remote communities, we would like to know how remote you may or may not be. We're just outside the urban population center of Victoria and in the west shore of the area.
And wanted to acknowledge that we're operating from the unceded territories of the Suncoatin speaking people, specifically the Sauk Nation. So thank you all, and thank you so much for turning on your camera. And what we're going to talk about today is the remote communities. We're about 45 minutes, and we're going to talk about some facts just to give us some grounding and knowledge base to be able to work from. We're going to talk about what is working well to develop First Nations and remote community economies, what can be done better. Community economic development planning and institution building that all contribute to economic success for First Nations. Those are particularly important for remote communities. So we do just ask that people go through and just take a look at the Code of Conduct Agreement. You will get a copy of the PDF, and Mark will share the slide in just a second. He's busy writing down all your names. So what we're going to just ask is, we always ask for a learner conduct agreement to share knowledge and information and treat each other with respect. Our job is to create a safe space for learning and actively participate when you can, particularly if you can share your ancestral knowledge or language or words. The deep wisdom embedded in that is something that's going to help all of our people. So very, very important. Making sure that if we do step in, if we feel like we need to, which we've never had to, our job is to create the safe space. So we might change a conversation if we need to. And if there's anything else that helps with understanding the conduct that you can share in your language or any understandings that would help with that way, that'd be appreciated. So where do we have people coming from?
We've got people from Ontario and Kemptville. That's our friend Ken. And we've got Shauna from Nisga'a territory. Welcome, Shauna from Terrace.
I thought that was a Gosnell related to Ginger Gosnell, right?
Yep.
Shauna, you're related to Ginger?
We'll wait for confirmation. Oh, she says yes in the text.
Awesome.
All right, thank you.
That's a powerful family.
And of course, we have our friends from Schwepnik territory, Williams Lake First Nation, and now residing in Burnaby. Welcome, welcome,
Wonderful.
Bernard.
From all parts of Canada.
And we have Treaty 6 territory covered off from the Alexis Nakota Sioux Nation. And I was reading about that nation in the newspaper this morning. So, and we have some very good news in your area of the world, as I understand it. So.
Okay, so we're going to start off by talking about the rural and remote community fact sheets, just to, again, give us some grounding. So what's really interesting when we were looking at how to best share information with you, understanding the importance of rural and remote communities in our Canadian economy. It represents about 20% of the people who live in Canada, and yet it contributes to about 30% of the national GDP. So our rural and remote communities are actually doing really well on a per capita basis, working harder than the average Canadian per se. So it's really interesting to see there's so much wealth and knowledge and good things happening in those communities. When we take a look at those unique circumstances, of course, there's always those things associated with all communities, including lower education, high employment rates, limited access to the labor market and human resources that we might have in other parts of Canada, access to education and training opportunities, the actual number of jobs and diversity of jobs are a match for those members living in a community. And there's also, most importantly, the broadband issue, which means that access to information, knowledge sharing, and business opportunities is also having some limits. So those things are actually common to First Nations as well. On top of it, we always have the other impacts that also exacerbate some of those conditions as well. But we also have to look at the opportunities. And that means that we can help to establish more affordable housing. So we know there's this huge urban move away of the what we call the hipsters in Canada into rural remote communities because there is better quality of life there. So we are seeing this high population increase and moving of talent away from the urban center. So there's some really interesting trends happening that way as well. And of course, for a lot of businesses, there's lower overhead costs. So all important to consider and thinking about how we might see the conditions in our rural and remote communities as being unique. There's a lot of shared challenges and opportunities there.
Of course, in some realities, the remote communities suffer from the challenges brought on by the impacts of colonization in a disproportionate way. But they also have the unique opportunity with a higher provider potential and a growing baby boom. We're seeing a giant population growth in communities across the Turtle Island, specifically here in BC. So it's really an important factor in your planning, in your training opportunities, education with the growing school age population coming. And like as Lara said, we're seeing a lot more people moving back to community too from urban centers for better qualities of life as well.
And I think it's important to talk about combining not only that large baby boom and the population growth of our Indigenous people, is to also combine that with the whole idea of UNDRIP and DRIPA. And we're going to see this huge revitalization of understanding of human rights and opportunities that go hand in hand with it, that we are literally seeing explode right after UNDRIP, DRIPA, and what's now called the United Nations Declaration Act, following the post repudiation of the Doctrine of Discovery. So we're seeing our human rights being really recognized in Canada in a big way. So with this growing population, we're going to see a lot of opportunities in the coming decades, and we have to do a lot of work to prepare for it, including some of the things we're going to talk about today.
So one of the last challenges in remote communities is the being unfortunately sometimes reliant on single source opportunities that do not produce diversified, resilient economies. So if you have a mining operation in your territory or a large significant logging operation in your territory, these can be dominant industries that can take away from some of that diversity. Some people build up too many eggs in the one basket. And so we're going to talk about how to even that basket up.
And that's one of the most common challenges in rural remote communities around the world. A lot of community economic development officers, technicians, advisors rely too much on one large project, where really the backbone of our economies is built on small and medium-sized enterprises. So it's really sexy and a lot of ego attached to getting the one big Walmart or the one big mall or the one big call center. But really what happens is all the money that goes into investing into those one big things actually don't have the same return on investment as having a diversified economy with supporting small and medium-sized enterprises and getting those quick wins, building baby steps towards more sustainable revenue. So really important. That's one of the biggest messages: diversify, diversify, diversify. Right now, we're looking at limited revenue streams. We really want to emphasize to you how important it is to have multiple revenue streams and create that resiliency in your economy. So when we take a look at Some of those common facts, again, it is some of those things that what we see happening in terms of a national plan to address those is there is a real emphasis now on establishing broadband nationally. So that's great. There's a real emphasis on building infrastructure as a part of the national rural communities strategy. That's been around for a couple of years, but we're really starting to see it take hold now. So after COVID, this has really been starting to happen. So a lot of investment in infrastructure and making sure that in our First Nations communities, we think about not only what our communities need, but what do we need to create and support an economy. So when we take a look at, for example, some of the communities we work with, huge emphasis on getting cell towers and broadband so that they can maximize opportunities.
And being connected is important in big cities as well as in remote locations. So making sure that things like remote access is available. And some of our communities are looking at the Starlink network to get direct cellular access to their communities so they can operate in their home communities as they would in towns and cities nearby. One of the other facts we have to deal with, of course, is smart industry, transforming IT skills and training. We talked about that baby boom before. We got a young population coming up, and making sure they're contemporarily trained in the smart industries that are necessary. I mean, we need electricians and technicians to install solar panels and non-carbon based energy sources. That's going to come from within. We have to plan for that.
And that's probably something that you've all heard about is skills inventories, is really taking a look at your population, the constituents and members you have in community, and what is their current skill set. Most of our communities are reliant on one or two resource-based economies. And that means that you have more labor intensive, more hands-on, more trades kinds of training, where really if you take similar kinds of things like Mark was saying with the solar power and the solar roofs, if you take those skills and apply for a lot of the funds in rural and remote communities, that's happening right now, to transform those same skills and bridge them from perhaps forestry or other areas that are resource-based into the smart economies, you can transfer those skills quite nicely. And that's the biggest opportunity that sits both within the realm of the nation's government as well as in corporate governance. So it's an overlap that is too often missed because people will look at their DevCores and say that's the DevCores job because that's all about creating business opportunities. Well, they might be looking at the nation saying that's all about employment and training, so they have to do it. Really, it's coming together and working through those partnerships to establish skills inventories to understand what are those current skills, soft and more formalized skills, as well as the skills needed for the future, and looking at tying those projects together that are associated with the smart tech industry that's growing in remote communities in a big way, especially as we're looking at our communities becoming energy source provider. So we are looking at solar power in a huge way. And in BC, I know in Canada it's happening as well, but in BC, we've got a huge number of projects and programs supporting green energy that is being led by First Nations, from Run the River, solar panels.
Run the River's solar farms, and then ocean-powered currents and tides generating energy sources in a renewable and sustainable way, which brings us to transportation. And as a part of that growth, getting those roads built, getting people to and from your community so they can get the goods and services that they need, and more to find a way to bring those goods and services into your community by making sure you have good road access to support delivery and ongoing logistics to make sure you can serve your community members that choose to live in your community.
And so when Mark's talking about this, not just roads, it's not just the hard part of it. It's like we were saying before about having cellular towers. So when people are driving into community, there is easy access. There's rest stops. There's all those things that associated with tourism as well that you want to have in there. So innovative tourism, meaning that you have ecotourism adventures, you have agritourism adventures, you have cultural tourism adventures. But again, taking a look at that in a very collaborative way. So you're supporting small business owners in community, as well as a wide range of those opportunities led through the development corporation or your economic development arm to be able to work with community members to establish those. Some communities, I'm just thinking about one that we went out to in Haida territory, they own the entire city that's adjacent to it. It's a remote community. They own all the buildings, all the infrastructure, all the tourism and hotels and accommodations and gas stations because they've been investing in tourism. So it does take a very comprehensive approach to tourism to be able to invest for the long term.
And they're also trying to make sure that tourism economy is diversified as well.
So what we know is working well to help First Nations communities is making sure that you have your own house in order. That is your own development corporation set up in a way that you have the institutional capacity to run that race. You don't just try and do the marathon overnight. You actually train by building that organizational capacity through your good corporate governance, through corporate governance policies, institution policies. That striving for ISO certification is a great tool to build that organizational capacity. So once you have that capacity, it's making sure that you can then reach out to other partners to be able to take a look at diversifying your local economy, which usually means a few steps, but we'll get into that in a minute. But it's also looking at long-term investments, using community engagement to identify where monies are going and where they're being retained in community. We call this the leaky bucket syndrome. We'll talk about in a second as well. But also looking at if we're putting our monies and we're operating a few shared communities under one nation, which a lot of our communities do, you might end up having repeat and duplicated administrative costs that through economies of scale might mean that for some nations that you have a certain contract and wholesale buying agreement from different suppliers like Grand and Toy and others, and then you could sell to other groups. So other communities like the Lillooet Nation, they have a broadband. Looking at where the monies were going, they developed a broadband company and they provide internet access for the entire area because they needed it. So look at what members are spending their money on and what their needs are to be able to look at where you can plug those gaps.
And identifying those opportunities in the long term goes back to skills inventories, knowing what opportunities lie in a single resource extraction economy. There's doing that work, but there's also servicing that work, having the ability to operate the mechanics and repair systems of different systems. When we learned from the forestry, for example, becoming the road building contractor used in the forestry. Don't compete at the forestry level, do something that you have control over. You've got men and women who can drive those machines and make the roads and do them to meet your standards as well, which is an important detail.
And this last one, smart is the new sexy. Absolutely. So when you take a look at economic development, the smart is making sure that you look at what are the new emerging technologies on the horizon for every single one of your current businesses or businesses you want to operate, so that you can take a look at things like AI, precision farming systems, drones, biosciences, mining, forestry, agriculture, fisheries, energy resource extraction, again, using as much technology as possible so you can lower the impact on the land, sustainable electricity production. So again, solar farms, and all of those are really, really important contributors to the economy that we're starting to see our First Nations having opportunities to jump into as the same as our rural and remote communities across Canada. All of these industries like forestry, thinking about, again, where can we make this a better product? Where can we do something a bit better in what we're currently working on, including value-added manufacturing or lumber value-added, transportation, as we said earlier, in tourism. And again, investing in those kinds of innovations wherever possible and clean technology.
And the reason why it's opportunity, but it's also important as stewards of the land, people who have taken care of the traditional territories in your communities for tens of thousands of years. You have a higher obligation to your community and to your community members and your families to do things in a sustainable, not damage the ecosystem that you live in, so you poison the water systems or make the environment around your homes and places to live are uncomfortable because of climate change. These are things that traditionally members have always wanted to look after. Find ways to bring that technology and that care into your operations in your territories by developing and asking for the best of the best when it comes to land management and air and land quality care as well. So
and
it's
so
your
the
opportunity.
big part I think we want to mention about partnerships is think about what you want to do. So thinking about what you're investing into, and creating those partnerships. Quite often we see, and we've worked with nations where they want to, for example, say, well, we need loans for our small business enterprises, for our companies we want to establish, for the companies we're operating now. So they start getting immersed in and replicating banking systems that they don't want to be doing. They need it. So they think they have to develop the entire thing, the entire system of banking for their community. When if you partner with an Aboriginal Capital Corporation or an AFI, you're able to leverage those resources similarly to any business that has that organizational depth or expertise. So, for example, when the 2010 Olympics was coming up, when I had the opportunity to take a look at the entire inventory of purchases made by prior Olympic operations coming into the area, I looked at the Salt Lake City inventory of everything that's been purchased, which they got the inventory from the prior Olympics. So it's a common set, similar to the common sets of investments in Canada right now when we look at the budgets. When we take a look at partnerships, so we can say we need fencing. We don't want to be creating the whole production and manufacturing of fencing and doing that as our own business. We want to benefit from that need, meaning that we want to partner with an organization that has shared values, but has the organizational depth and capacity to bring us fences. And we use our position to be able to leverage that opportunity and partner with them in a meaningful way. So too often, some people get really caught into the granular details and put a lot of human resources, which are just as important as financial resources, into areas of activity that really could benefit from partnering rather than trying to recreate the wheel.
And the Minister of Rural Economic Development shares those same concerns. That's the statement we are sharing on screen there. It is about collaboration and working together to make sure we can all come together.
So this is the leaky bucket. We were talking about that so many of our First Nations don't think about it as much. It used to be about 20 years ago when I first started doing this, a real awareness of the leaky bucket syndrome. And then it kind of disappeared, but I like reminding people of it because it's one of the first initial steps is to scan what your environment is within your community. And that is if 90% of your members are spending 50% of their paychecks and monies to go out and spend it all on a save on foods, half a mile away or 7 miles away, and then coming back and not that money not being retained in community. Take a look at co-op grocery stores, take a look at other options to have that money being retained in community and have those profits regenerated over and over again so that you can have multiple benefits from that singular dollar of investment rather than having to see that money go through those holes in that leaky bucket to other communities and others benefit.
Other nations are traveling tens of miles down the road to a local community to do their shopping and using sometimes private transportation and paying extraordinary amounts for that. So some communities looking at their own bus systems, their own delivery mechanisms to get the vital things that people need at the grocery store right in their community. That's a business.
So the other thing that we see happening a lot, like we talked about, are those investments into single business ideas rather than taking a look at diversified. So one of the most important things to me as a grassroots community economic development person is our people. And culturally, it is our people. So why wouldn't we spend the time to talk to our people, to know their skills, their career and education goals, to align our work with that. So again, what we see is sometimes a lot of ego attached to this, and we know better, and you know, they don't know what they're talking about, all these things that really don't empower our people. And I really believe that if we empower our people by asking and understanding what their needs and interests are, employment goals, education goals, we can utilize all that collective intelligence and energy to be able to build really sustainable, resilient economies, just like we used to. We have 20,000 years of history of creating sustainable economies. We've kind of forgotten that, or it's been interrupted. So when we take a look at local economies all across Canada and national and regional economies, 98% of that is being driven by small and medium-sized enterprises, 98%. And yet in First Nations communities, it's only 1.4%. We are not investing in our own people. And I did that for almost a decade of looking at working with Aboriginal financing institutions to build and support the 55 Coast Salish nations to do just that. And we won awards year after year because we put a lot of energy into building capacity and supports and awareness for them to be able to open their own businesses. Today, I was just reading a news article or a report, I think it was about 6 months ago, and they were saying that BC has the highest rates of small and medium-sized enterprise Indigenous businesses, but they don't know why. I know why. Spent a decade beating the ground to make that happen. So when we take a look at that huge mismatch of disempowering our people and trying to create these huge, mega projects that benefit our people rather than empowering our people to build themselves up and to be informed and knowledge-based in terms of the decisions they make collectively in our communities, that's what we'd like to see. So,
and that sense of self-actualization, getting people creating their own agency when it comes to employment is a direct building block for nations of themselves becoming self-governed, because that takes the control back, and they can use all these community members who are used to taking control back of their lives and what's going on, and business can be the way forward for them as well. So they can help stimulate the ability for your community to be self-governed, and that's all comes from a governance structure that's built and shared across the community, both from a governance level as well from your business level. So those people who are working for your DevCorps are treated the same as it would be if they're working for the nation themselves. We don't want anything to be different. So that's a really important detail.
So when we take a look at that idea of leadership collaboration in developing communities, economies, we really need to do not just with our people, but taking a look at those other partnerships like we talked about earlier, but it also means that you're undertaking research. So we always recommend making sure that you take a look at, again, where is the money in your community going to? Where are those holes in the leaky bucket? And how can you stop that from going outside of the community as much by creating different businesses and supporting small businesses to plug those leaks? You don't want to try and make sure that it's something that you don't even have a dollar leak out of. You want to be able to get to most of it. And that's going to be, plugging those critical areas. You want to take a look at local industry trends and businesses to identify opportunities to partner and innovate. One of the biggest mistakes we see is leadership coming together with one or two consultants, and there's no research, and they just brainstorm ideas on strategies without that knowledge base. That's a big mistake. Make sure you do your research, what's happening in not only your industry, but what in your community, but what's happening in the industries that are traditionally and potentially opportunities for your community. Take a look at the landscape in terms of what is the 10-year horizon on that industry and what can we do to pick up on the innovation today. We've always transformed and used the best tools available to us in our communities. This is no different. So we want to be able to take a look at all of that research to inform the work that we do and the choices we make, and that's called good corporate governance. We also want to make sure that we have the strengths-based skills inventory we talked about to know what your members are doing, where their interests. We've seen communities where they've invested millions into aquaculture businesses that they, again, just a few people on council saying this is a good idea, putting tons of money into it, and then no one wanting to run the company because no one was interested in it. They didn't do that match. So they didn't treat their own members like human beings and say, what do you want and how can we build this economy with you collaboratively? So really making sure you understand your people's needs and their own strengths and gifts and abilities and interests so that you can build that collaboration right in community, starting from the grassroots.
And that's where your power is with the people.
And also identifying whatever those local needs are. Again, the common ones that you see in all rural and remote communities, broadband, infrastructure, housing, is something that we can also take a look at, and with our own revenue streams that we have access to, but also some of the national revenue streams that are coming available with this awareness of rural and remote community needs. So those partnerships, take a look at, again, not just federally, but regionally. Take a look at your own nation's revenue opportunities through ISC and SIR and all of those opportunities, but don't think just that's the only option. There's lots of national opportunities that are for any rural and remote community.
It pays to be connected and to stay and ask the questions to get that information you need in your community. That's
and I just want to mention the last bullet in there. Yeah. One of the things that we see some communities not doing is partnering with ISC and ACCs or AFIs and CFDCs. So all of those, if you haven't heard that term before, of course, ISC has their own what's called LEDSP funding, LEDSP, that was before when I first started doing this work a long time ago, Aboriginal Business Canada, that transformed into a melded ISC program, and now is LEDSP. And a lot of nations use that like slush funds. And really what happens is the unofficial policy within ISC is if you work with those funds to establish good governance, good policies, business plans, you can access more and more contributions to build your economy. Similarly with AFIs and ACCs, if you work with them, you have greater history and relationships where they can leverage and fund opportunities. You can literally, and I've worked with communities and individuals where over and over again, they developed this great relationship, always paid back on time, came back, did more expansion and grew in baby steps, which is always what I recommend. And making sure that when they did and they were ready, they could literally just phone and say, hey, I need to do a business expansion. I've got some pro formas or I've got a quote. We've done this so many times. So I'm like, oh yeah, just send it in. What do you need? And no problem. And not even having to write a business plan or a whole, they'll go through the entire huge process because there's such good familiarity and build that relationship with your ACCs and AFIs. Similarly, doing some of this research like skills inventories and those kinds of things with CFDCs to leverage opportunities. Like in BC, we had, I said Prince George last time, it's Prince Rupert Port was CFDC 1637. That was a First Nations led initiative to develop the port up there. So they couldn't get themselves together. And the First Nations up there said, we need to do this and we're going to lead it. And they got all the CFDCs and federal partners and what they call 3Ps together and said, we're doing this. And as First Nations, we're going to lead it. And this is what we're going to do. And the government came in and wrote all the checks and the port happened. Multi-million-dollar project because the First Nations led it. You can too. So making sure that you think about that in the same way, how can you get what you need and dream big because you can do it. So when we take a look at making sure that you have a diversified and resilient economy, again, making sure that you have a good understanding of community members' needs comes through the development of a community economic development plan, which means you take a look at, again, all the research and you bring it to the entire community, not just leadership, to say, what do you want to see in the area of this industry? What do you want to see in this area? And let them know. We're seeing forestry declining as an industry. What are some of the things that we could take a look at as unique opportunities for our community? We're seeing technology build. What are some of those opportunities you'd like to see? We're seeing tourism as an opportunity in our communities. How would you like to be a part of it? And once you get all of that, again, collective intelligence and energy together, you have more energy and more ideas and more employment, but also you're empowering them so that they know they can start businesses, they'll be supported to do that. Also, they now can start thinking about really meaningfully getting the education or training that they need to make this happen for themselves and their families and their clans, houses, and community. So you're empowering them to be champions for you if you include them in the planning.
In that support and development of community members, making sure they have small development business training and workshops that can be hosted and managed by the DevCorps on behalf of the nation to make good, skilled business people. And from there, the idea that you can culturally enhance those opportunities by making sure your DevCorps and all the business you create respect your local traditions, honor your cultural practices, and allow for the language of your community to be used in that, and people's cultural expressions can be brought forward in the workplace as well. That's very empowering for those who come to work for the DevCorps and a way to feel included as they move forward in the world. And so the idea that this capacity building, this connection with your community members, looking to find a way to solve the business problems, because when people are part of that solution, they're also consumers or supporters of the decisions that are made to have a better business outcome because everyone was involved.
Also, Mark brings up a really good point too. With small business workshops, that's what I did in the 55 Coast Salish nations. And that was based on some research that the AFIs had done 20 years ago. And what they found is that individuals or groups of people who invest their energy into 2, 3, 4 week programs to write business plans aren't actually successful as those people that get a one-day workshop who leverage those opportunities to just get the business plan written and start their businesses. We saw higher rates of completion, business starts, and we got awards for 7 years in a row because all we did was once a month, we went out into one of the 55 communities and kept doing workshops. What do you want? Asking them, and I'll share those tools with you if you want. The business workshop tools, the PowerPoint, the workbooks, the train the trainer workbooks, I've got them all. And going out and asking what they want in terms of their own planning to start their own businesses. And we saw, again, the startup of businesses just go through the roof. So
those community economic development plans, styled like a CCP, in fact, can be run alongside a CCP because you're talking to the same people, you're asking different questions potentially, but you are looking to get community members' input, both locally and those now with our new technologies, those having to live away from home can be contributing through Zoom. And this ability to understand what the needs are, who has a desire to go into what kind of enterprise or what kind of industry that's trending well in your area. And that's where the critical mass comes in. Oh, we got 17 people that need this kind of interest. That means we have a training opportunity to bring some training partners in here to get people skilled. And that means we can bring some business development money in here. And those who successfully move forward can take on this new challenge. But we're doing it because we're all doing it together. There's no, and we're keeping that bucket plugged up.
And even in that, doing the same thing that Mark was talking about, it's collaborating with the nation, and skills inventories are a great way to do it, to identify members' strengths and needs. So that, for example, if you have 50 people who can be easily transitioning their current skill sets from a resource sector into installing solar panels or generating solar power, you now can have a solar farm and get a lot of funds working with the nation from your dev corps and partnering to get that training. So you have a large labor pool of people skilled and ready to do that work that's very technical, that's easily transitioned from a lot of the resource sectors. So those should be renewed every couple of years, every 3 to 5 years. We know with the pace of change, it's never going to be slower than today. That's Mark's quote.
That's the one thing I've come to learn is if you think things are changing fast now, this is the slowest it will ever be going forward, because it's only going to get faster from here on in. So if you think the pace of change is tough today and having a job to adapt, adaptation and learning how to cope with changes will be the biggest success skill you'll be able to acquire going forward, because the pace of change is never going to be slower than it is now. It's only going to get faster. So if you let's have that sit with you for a few minutes and think about it, how can then us as a community and others take advantage of the ongoing changes that are coming? We need to be ready.
And when we take a look at development corporations, really important to make sure you structure those. And we're going to talk about that in a minute as well. But when we take a look at community economic development, you want to make sure that, again, you tap into that small and medium-sized enterprise potential. That's huge in our communities because we're always good at trade and business. So that can be tapped into easily. Making sure you establish those partnerships with the ACCs or AFIs to be able to make sure that you can access that capital to be able to support them to equity match, or to be able to start their own businesses and have them tie into some of the economic development projects you're working on. And again, making sure that you can make a commitment of your organization, nation, and or DevCorps to have those small business workshops once a month, because it builds capacity over time.
And the last part of that is building your capable governing institution in your development corporation, which restarts with the community leadership establishing a strategic direction, utilizing legally binding tools, some known as the business charter. This helps to establish the DevCorps' values and purpose and the articles of its incorporation. So understanding that why we're in that business is important.
So before Mark gets into that, I just wanted to start with the reason we have this slide. This is one of the biggest areas we get asked to help communities with in terms of setting up or reestablishing their development corporations. They hire most First Nations hire business lawyers or corporate lawyers who are skilled in standard business law practices, which means they'll take a numbered company off the shelf and they operate from a shareholder primacy perspective that doesn't include engagement with their own community members. But when nations do the work, they're actually utilizing the resources of the community at large to be able to establish these businesses on behalf of the nation. So they operate almost like a community, or they do operate like a community economic development corporation, meaning that shareholder primacy needs to be put to the side, and it needs to include in writing accountabilities back to community, which again creates that circular feedback loop of building their capacity and participating in the economic development. But what we've seen is that when we take a look at development corporations that are challenged, there's several key areas where leadership has not set the strategic direction for them to do their work effectively. And so those areas are having a clear set of values, a clear purpose, establishing the scope of businesses that development corporation is authorized to operate within and those that they shouldn't be, defining roles and responsibilities of the shareholders and the board. That's often not even talked about. It's very limited, or it's just written up by a lawyer and prescribed, and it's not actually as accurate as it could be. Making sure that you have corporate governance policies that define who should be leading the development corporation or your business ventures through a competency matrix to make sure that you always have the best quality people there for your people. Requiring a community economic development plan, making sure that the development corporation or your businesses report back in the form and frequency that leadership defines, which usually, as Mark was saying earlier, should align with that of the nation quarterly and annually, and a requirement for operational policies to be aspiring again to like ISO certification to ensure that it has that organizational depth and strength to do the marathon run that it has to. And when any of those things are missing, DevCors and businesses that are our First Nations fail and are challenged. So we always recommend this. We always recommend it to be in the form of a business charter, because it means it's a legally binding document, just not a good idea in a handshake, which won't be honored. We really want to make sure that for all of the people, our people, our champions, our allies that work with us, that this is legally required so that there's no ambiguity. And making sure that those agreements for loan repayments and all of those other things around decision trees, around how decisions and investments and political support and economic development investments are made, so everyone knows their roles and responsibilities, but also how to make decisions in a clear and transparent way.
And because this corporation is benefiting the community members, sharing, explaining, inviting the community members into this development is a critical part of that. They're going to be the foundation that holds this business together. They're going to be the employees and the supporters of said business. And therefore, understanding that the monies that are given to the DevCorp are the assets of the nation, and therefore will be brought back into the community. And it has to be accountable to the community. So that's an important detail that comes up in the business charter. It obligates the DevCorp to operate in a way that meets the needs and the values of the community that it's taking place in.
So the last one we want to share is this example of that depth of organizational capacity being reflected in one really common example. Michelle's nodding her head. We've shared this so many times with her in workshops. We have had the honor of working with Burnt Christmas in terms of his sharing of this information several times. He's brilliant. He's the one who started this work 25 years ago with Member 2, who was a small Eastern Canadian community of about 300 people at the time, struggling with all the same things rural and remote communities suffer from and are challenged with. And they decided they were going to do something different. And they were going to build a strong, capable governing institution to do this work. So as they did it, as soon as they got their ISO certification, because they had policies for every single area that could and should be made, they ended up having the world come to their door. And they immediately went within a few years through exponential growth to have multi-million-dollar revenues coming in, so much so that they could decline any funding from ISC because ISC would ask them to jump through hoops. And they said, no, we don't need it. And they ended up begging them to give them the money. So it's wonderful hearing Burnt Christmas tell that story.
It is,
but
good.
They ended up doing so well that 20 years later, fast forward, the whole East Coast lobster issue that we heard about last year in the news, they had the gravitas, the ability to move into that space because they were a neighboring nation to say, this is a challenge with this, the lobster fishery, even though it's legally their right to do this. And there are all these large corporations operating in this realm. Let's buy the biggest one and just get rid of the problem. So $25 million later, they bought the largest East Coast fishery in Canada, and the problem disappeared. And just a couple of weeks ago, that a great article in there that all those racist attacks that we saw, because there's such a large corporation and has so much money invested now, Canada's standing behind Member 2 and putting these racists in jail and charging them. So it's completely changed from what was the story to this large, what ends up being a large corporation interest and corporate interest in Canada, that now they just completely changed the dynamics in their community.
But the best part of that story is just the recent development, in so much as the lobster fishery has its price points and moves up and down. But one of the things that they're looking at as diversification is electrifying the fleet that services the lobster industry.
Electric
that
boats.
That means there's a whole new corporate entity now in member two that builds boats that have sustainable long-term energy concepts built into the design. So when the electric engines and systems are ready to be adapted, they're ready to go. So that's how they're looking to fix that leaky bucket themselves.
So we wanted to have some time for questions and answers. We could talk about this all day, but we only have an hour. So we just wanted to see if there's any questions or information that we can share. So Crystal, Chris, Ken, Bernard, Shauna, and Georgina. Georgia. I know we've seen you in workshops before, so wonderful to see you back. Just wondering if you have any questions or anything we can clarify or any tools or information that we can help with. So Crystal, how was the workshop for you today, and any questions or anything we can clarify or you'd like to see?
Hi, sorry to unmute. No, it's really interesting. Like, I'm just a marketing and communications coordinator for the Treaty and Aboriginal Land Stewards Association. I recently got to see Michelle do an amazing MC job at a CANDO conference. And so I applied for their training program that's up and coming, just kind of with the back thought of learning more about economic development and how we can support our membership as well with resources and things like that. And a lot what we hear within our realm is that capacity building is a huge issue. Like for us, we focus on lands management, so on reserve issues, and trying to find resources for them to help build that capacity is definitely something that I'm interested in and learning more about. So I in turn can help support them as well as say, this is where you go, this is what you need to do. And so I'm always online trying to, find different avenues, but at a certain point you kind of like get them all collected. And, I think that that's definitely one of the big ones that's, up and coming right now. Thank you.
Well, I'm happy to share the small business introduction to small business workshop for Indigenous peoples that I developed 20 years ago. It was recognized as best practice in Western Canada by Western Economic Diversification 20 years ago. But it has been shared across the province with all of the 12 Aboriginal business centers I helped to establish. So it is really proven tools. I'm happy to share that. And there's also a Indigenous financial management or Indigenous financial planning workbook and train the trainer as well that I was provided for free, and I'm happy to share that as well too. So there's a couple awesome tools that we're happy to provide. Good.
Ken says there's no questions. On to Chris. Anything from you, Chris? Any thoughts or observations? We'll let Chris get back to his desk first.
I'm just going to ask Ken or Zen, how was the workshop for you? I know you didn't have questions, but just want to know, how did you, was the workshop helpful? Is there any information that we could add in the future?
It was pretty comprehensive. I don't have any questions. It was great. It was a great presentation. I am really impressed. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Bernard, how was the workshop today for you? Any questions or information you'd like access to that we can help with?
Bernard says there's no questions either.
Okay. Bernard, felt good, are you saying?
Yeah, says here.
Just wondering how today's workshop was for you today. Any questions or any information that we can help with sharing or support you to do all that good work you do in community?
Shauna says no questions. Amazing workshop. Thanks, Shauna.
Excellent. And then Georgia, how was today's workshop for you? Again, same question. Any questions or information we can share that might help you to do your work?
What was ACC?
Aboriginal Capital Corporation. Great question. That's how old I am. I think they've actually changed a long time ago to call themselves Aboriginal Financing Institutions. And And that was probably 15 years ago. So I still say ACC. But yeah, they're probably all called AFIs now, Aboriginal Financing Institutions. And they're funded by the federal government to do that kind of capacity building and high risk lending, so that they contribute grants, they contribute equity matching, they help you to write business plans, they do a ton of work. So they're really great partners.
So good people to have as part of your conversation and introductions in your part of your community economic development planning.
Excellent. So Michelle, how is today's workshop for you?
Amazing as usual. I couldn't help but to think how much of a gift you both are for I can't even, okay, let's pick another word. That you really understand the gift, the capacity, the resource that we are as a people, and how you even talked about we don't tap into this resource enough. And you actually bring the tools and the teachings and the knowledge to be able to, open those doors, walk through those doors, and to, support. And I think you even said in there today, dream big. And so I just so appreciate the message, but then the knowledge and the tools and the capacity building along the way. So thank you so much. So that was my big takeaway today, was a gift. What a gift the both of you are, and even offering the tools that you've developed along the way to share so that we can build within our own nations and capacity. And so thank you so much. But yeah, one thing I did write down too, Mark, you had said talking about our young people and contemporarily training them. And I just loved that sentence, that phrase. So that really connected with me. So thank you. There is their contact information. Like, talk about a resource in our wider community. These two are such an incredible resource. So be free to connect with them. There's the email right there, phone number. We are just honored that you could share, only 45 minutes. Oh, what if we could have a whole day? But thank you so much. What an honor to have been able to sit with you all again. And also just to plug, you mentioned member two. I just thank you also for bringing that story back. And then that follow up from, last year I didn't know that. So thank you for that. That gave me goosebumps. So exciting. But also CANDO's national conference is in member two this, I think, July. Yeah, June. So if that's something that you are interested in, go to their website, and there's information there.
You
So
can witness them having plugged the bucket there, because now they have a convention space and a hotel for you to stay at. So we got that all covered. So
that's right. And I loved that you brought in the leaky bucket piece. That is so integral for us to understand as a people. So thank you so much. All right, everybody. Well, I hope that you walk away inspired and honored by the knowledge that was shared. Thank you for being here, everybody. And we will see you again. Be well.
Thank you. Bye now.